Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. Today on ABC News Live, multiple strikes on Ukraine's major cities, including the capital of Kyiv. Russia is launching attacks on civilian targets days after an attack on a key bridge crucial to Russia's supply line. Hear what Vladimir Putin is saying and the reaction from the White House. The midterm elections are now less than a month away. Our Rachel Scott looks at the crucial battleground states that could determine control of the Senate and the House. And violent protests are escalating in Iran after the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. Now the new women allegedly dying at the hands of authorities as protests break out around the world in solidarity. But we begin with that new escalation in the war in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he personally ordered multiple attacks on major cities in Ukraine, blaming Ukraine for an explosion on a strategic bridge into Crimea. Chief Foreign Correspondent Ian Pannell is in Kharkiv with the latest.
Russia launching multiple attacks across Ukraine. The capital, Kyiv, coming under the most intense bombardment since the war began. At least 4 districts were hit. Russia deliberately targeting utilities, power plants and water supplies. But also civilian sites have been hit and many people now hiding in shelters across Ukraine. The U.S. Embassy now urging American citizens to shelter in place and depart Ukraine as soon as it's safe to do so. President Zelensky condemning Russia as terrorists and calling to speak to an urgent G7 meeting. Zelensky saying they want panic and chaos. They want to destroy our energy system. They're hopeless. These strikes coming after that devastating attack on the key strategic bridge into Crimea. Vladimir Putin blaming Ukraine and saying there's no doubt it was a terrorist act. The explosion a devastating blow to Russia's supply line. Video circulating online shows the moment a truck explodes, igniting 7 nearby fuel tanks, causing severe damage and partially collapsing the bridge. Located in the Kerch Strait, the bridge is the only land route connecting Russian-occupied Crimea to Russia itself.
Even if parts of the bridge are still usable, it's still going to be very difficult for the Russians to resupply their troops across this bridge into the south, which will give the Ukrainians a strong battlefield advantage. But this was as much a psychological blow as it was a military blow.
The 4-lane highway and railway unveiled in 2018 personally by Putin. Now long line of cars wait to cross the badly damaged bridge. And in the aftermath, Putin also appointing a new general to oversee the war in Ukraine. Army General Sergei Surovikin, known as the Butcher in Syria for his role as the commander there at the time of the Aleppo mass bombardment. Now mounting fears of Putin's next move.
You have modern nuclear power and the leader of that modern nuclear power willing to use irresponsible rhetoric the way that Mr. Putin has several times in just the last week or two, as well as the high tensions in Ukraine over just the course of the last few days. The stakes are very high right now.
Our thanks to Ian Pannell for that report. And ABC's Britt Clennett joins me live now from Kyiv for more on that. Britt, what's the latest on this recovery effort after these strikes?
You know, Diane, it's been quite striking. We've been down at some of those target areas in downtown Kyiv, and it's really been quite impressive to see the resilience, the cleanup effort that's underway almost immediately after those strikes. You know, people repairing the traffic lights already and clearing up the road. That's after 80 missiles headed towards Ukraine. About half of them, though, were intercepted by air defense. 11 people, though, at least 11 people are dead. Dozens more are injured. This is the biggest attack on the capital, though, since the beginning of the war, and the first attack on the city centre, making this a clear escalation. That really needs to be made clear. You know, Putin saying he personally ordered these strikes, warning that if the attacks by Ukraine continue, the answers will be severe. So, you know, this morning we woke up to the sound of several loud bangs just after 8 a.m. Smoke was rising from the city centre behind me. These were attacks on infrastructure, but also on civilian areas, you know, with no apparent strategic or military significance, including a park and a pedestrian bridge that has no other purpose other than sightseeing. One of the first targets close to a playground where kids come to enjoy themselves. This is also of no strategic importance. So the message from Putin is one of terror. Diane?
All right, Britt Clennett in Kyiv for us. Stay safe, Britt. Thank you. And the White House is now clarifying President Biden's comments, warning that the risk of nuclear Armageddon is at its highest since the Cold War. The White House now says those comments were not based on any new intelligence of an imminent threat. ABC's Kenneth Moten joins me live now from Washington with more on that. So, Kenneth, how are U.S. officials now reacting to these missile attacks?
Well, Diane, they haven't, but we expect they will. It is a federal holiday, of course, so it is a little quiet here in Washington. The president is at home in Delaware, so no comment from him, but we expect maybe we could hear something from the president when he returns to the White House later this afternoon. Biden made headlines in recent days for talking about a desperate nuclear-armed Russia, saying we haven't seen and haven't been this close to Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The administration pulled back on those comments, saying Biden wasn't referencing any new intelligence assessment. We do know that the Biden administration is in near constant communication with the Ukrainians and have pledged to provide them with assistance for as long as it takes. Diane, U.S. officials, including the president, have been openly questioning how does a cornered Putin find a way out of this? Well, it is clear today that it's about escalation on Ukraine.
All right, Kenneth Moten, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And let's bring in ABC News contributor and retired Marine Colonel Steve Ganyard for more on this. Steve, what do you make of this new barrage of missile attacks on Ukrainian citizens? Why, or cities, but also citizens, I should say. So why target civilians instead of military targets?
Diane, I think if you listen to Mr. Putin, he characterized the attack on the bridge as a terrorist attack. So he justified his attack today on civilian areas as sort of a quid pro quo for a terrorist attack. So obviously, if this is the best the Russians can do, then that's pretty sad. The thing that concerns me the most here is the attacks on infrastructure. Sometimes when you hit parts of the power infrastructure, it can take a long time to repair. And he's doing this just prior to winter, trying to take away electricity, which is obviously important for the economy, for heating homes, and for the well-being of the Ukrainian people. So I'm going to be very interested to see what kind of damage assessments were made there and how quickly they can get the power back on, because that's far more long-lasting in its effects.
Now, Putin, as you mentioned, says he openly admits that he personally ordered these strikes in response to the attack on the Crimea Bridge. The Crimea Bridge, though, our military analyst said this morning, pretty clear argument that that's a military target. So the fact that he's targeting civilian areas in response to that, could that be considered a war crime? And if so, why admit to that?
I think you probably just add this to a long list of war crimes that Russia hopefully will be held accountable for, and Mr. Putin himself when this is all said and done. But yes, the bridge is a key resupply point. The Russians are very dependent on rail, the Russian military on rail for resupply. And this was really the only way to get supplies into their troops in the south. If they have to begin to bring their supplies in from the north, then that's all along roads. And many of those roads are within Ukrainian military range. And so it's going to make the supply and resupply of their troops in the south very, very difficult. And this is why the Ukrainians should have an advantage on the battlefield for the next couple of weeks.
So how do you expect Ukraine to respond to this?
I think they'll continue to do what they've been doing. They've been using very precise munitions that the U.S. and other countries have provided, that very precise intelligence that makes those very precise weapons usable, and they'll continue to wear down the Russians. The supplies that the Russians use, the ways that the Russians conduct this war are critically important, and they really have the Russians in the south in particular backed up. So now there's really a push from the north and a push from the south. They will continue to do that in ways that make the Russians weak and look for battlefield advantages. But remember, Diane, winter is coming, and winter makes everything hard. When the first snow begins to fly, the battlefield is going to change and will probably slow down. So Mr. Putin wants the rest of Europe to consider what the consequences might be of not having enough gas to stay heated. And what he's looking for is to divide Europe from its support to Ukraine in the wintertime.
All right, Steve Ganyard, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
And we're following breaking news. A senior official has confirmed a cyber attacker within the Russian Federation has targeted several U.S. airports. The official says the systems targeted do not handle air traffic control, security, or internal communications. The attack does not appear to have affected any flights so far, but the websites for LAX, Chicago O'Hare, and Des Moines airports have all gone down. Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport's website is now back online after going down earlier today. And we will continue to bring you updates on this developing story as we learn more. Election day is now under a month away, and control of Congress is on the ballot. 538's election forecast shows Democrats are slightly favored to keep control of the Senate, while Republicans are slightly favored to win the House. Now candidates in key races are dashing across their states in a final push for votes. Congressional correspondent Rachel Scott has the latest.
With just 1 month to go, candidates are crisscrossing their states, making their final pitches to voters.
Send me to D.C., and I'll be that 51st vote.
Republicans are fighting to win back the House and the Senate, and they see the path to victory through several key battleground states. In Georgia, GOP leaders rallying behind Senate Republican candidate Herschel Walker, even as his campaign is rocked by controversy.
This here, the abortion thing is false. It's a lie.
Walker opposes abortion, no exceptions. His Democratic rival, Senator Raphael Warnock, making it clear he supports abortion rights.
I support reproductive choice. My opponent, on the other hand, is talking about a nationwide ban.
Pennsylvania talk show host and Republican candidate Dr. Mehmet Oz is facing off against Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, back on the campaign trail after suffering a stroke just months ago.
Oz doesn't care about Pennsylvania. Never has.
I'm the guy for change, and Pennsylvanians want change.
And in Nevada, vulnerable Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto is hoping to fend off GOP candidate Adam Laxalt, a former state attorney general.
Folks, we only have one shot to save this state and save America. Let's go out and get it done. Get out and vote.
Both parties framing this election as a referendum. For Republicans, it's all about the economy and inflation, while Democrats hope abortion rights will become a defining issue, playing out across the gubernatorial races, too.
And election denials have been center stage this election. 538 found that 60% of Americans will have an election denier on the ballot this election. We know this is especially critical in those gubernatorial and Secretary of State races, which will have a major influence on how elections are carried out in the future. Diane.
All right, Rachel Scott, thanks for that. And outrage is growing around the world over the Iranian crackdown on anti-government protesters. At least 185 people have been killed over the past several weeks, and protests are showing no signs of ending. Foreign correspondent James Longman has the latest.
Violent protests escalating in the streets of Iran. Iran Human Rights now saying at least 185 citizens have been killed, 19 of them children, since protests began nearly 4 weeks ago over the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. She died in police custody, arrested after being accused of wearing her hijab improperly. But Amini is not alone. Now the faces of more young Iranian women are coming to light, allegedly dying at the hands of authorities. Local media outlets are reporting on the death of Nika Shakarimi, seen in this video posted on social media. The family of the 16-year-old saying Iranian authorities kept her death a secret for 9 days before burying her in a remote area. And this video, confirmed by Amnesty International, shows Sarina Esmailzadeh, a 16-year-old vlogger on YouTube, also reportedly killed by security forces. As the deaths mount, so does solidarity around the globe. Protests breaking out in Paris, The Hague, and London. And women worldwide now seen snipping their hair.
For freedom.
From Oscar-winning actresses to politicians. It's become a symbol of the resistance. On Saturday, an act of defiance to what would usually be a state-controlled broadcast. Hackers interrupted the program with an anti-government message. The chants heard saying, "Women, life, freedom," and text reading, "The blood of our young people dropping from your fingers. Join us and arise."
These protests have spread to all parts of society, from some of the poorest neighborhoods to some of the richest, and all ages as well. High school kids are taking part in this. It's a dangerous time for the regime in Iran. Diane?
All right, James Longman, thanks for that. Coming up, we are celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day and learning more about the ceremonies and events marking the occasion across the country. Stay with us. Welcome back. Today marks Indigenous Peoples Day here in the U.S., celebrating the contributions of Indigenous people and recognizing the commitment to tribal nations. 1 year ago, President Biden called upon the people of the U.S. to observe this day with ceremonies and activities to mark the occasion. Susan Faircloth of the Coharie Tribe and professor and director at the School of Education at Colorado State joins me now for more on this. Professor, thanks so much for being here. Many Americans know today is Columbus Day. So why is it important to recognize Indigenous people on this day? And can you celebrate both?
Thank you. Great questions. Before I answer that question, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm joining this interview from Florida in the St. Pete's area. And I'd like to take a moment to honor the tribes that are indigenous to this area, particularly the Miccosukee and the Seminole nations and tribes. So to answer your question, Indigenous Peoples Day is critically important because it offers an opportunity for us to rethink, particularly as educators, to rethink how we teach what some have characterized as a sanitized version of the arrival of Columbus in the Americas and the impact that his arrival had on Indigenous peoples. The question around whether or not we can celebrate or should celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day and Columbus Day is a quite complicated question. As an Indigenous person, I would argue that the current federal holiday remains Columbus Day. However, as an Indigenous person, it's difficult to honor and celebrate a day that was established in honor of someone whose arrival led to the taking of land, life, liberty, culture, and land from Indigenous peoples.
So what are some of the ways that we can celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day?
There are a variety of different ways. At my own home institution, there are celebrations on our main lawns of the campus where Native faculty, staff, and students are coming out to talk about Indigenous peoples, issues, cultures, lands, languages. We have someone from the Native American Rights Fund who's coming in to talk about the Indian Child Welfare Act. There's opportunities to have teach-ins in schools where we're bringing in literature and speakers and members of tribes. Other communities are having parades, celebrations. So a variety of different ways in which we can honor Indigenous Peoples Day.
And some critics have said that a day of observance isn't enough. What are some of the unique challenges that Indigenous people still face today in this country, and how would you like to see them corrected?
I would agree that one day is not enough. And what typically happens, and we especially find this in schools across the nation, is that American Indian, Native American peoples tend to come to our thinking and to our minds on two occasions during the year, one being Indigenous Peoples Day, which is a more recent observation or celebration, and the other is during the month of November when we traditionally celebrate Thanksgiving. I would argue that one day is certainly not enough when we think about the wide variety and diversity of American Indian, Native American peoples across the nation, with there being more than 600 different state and federally recognized tribes. And so we should think about ways in which we can incorporate Native and Indigenous histories and teachings throughout the year and not limit it to one day. So there can be teachings, there can be readings, and other observations.
Nice.
In terms of some of the issues that we face, we continue to face some of the highest rates of suicide, highest rates of students dropping out or being pushed out of school, highest rates of obesity. So a multitude of different issues that we continue to face.
All right, Susan Faircloth, we appreciate your time today, and a happy Indigenous Peoples Day to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, it is World Mental Health Day, and the founder of 10% Happier, Dan Harris, is here to talk about his new journey to self-love, why it's so important to you and the people around you after this. Welcome back. Today is World Mental Health Day, and we are marking the day with our friend and former colleague, Dan Harris, author, founder, and host of 10% Happier. Dan has spent years now spreading the message of the benefits of meditation. Now his new TED Talk focuses on his journey to self-love.
Relationships are probably the most important variable when it comes to human flourishing. Your inner weather improves even further, and up you go. And that is the whole point here. Self-love, properly understood, not as narcissism, but as having your own back, is not selfish. It makes you better at loving other people.
And Dan joins me live now for more on this. Dan, this TED Talk was inspired by something called a 360 review that you ordered. You're laughing already. Talk to me about what that is and what you learned.
Okay, well, let's start with what it is. Have you ever had one?
No.
Okay, so 360 review is usually done in a corporate context. They hire a coaching firm, they identify an executive, and they say, we're going to do an anonymous survey with your bosses, peers, and then direct reports. And the idea is to get a panoramic sense of your strengths and weaknesses. I did, as I say in the TED Talk, I did the colonoscopy version of a 360, which included my colleagues, both here at ABC News and at the startup company I co-founded, and my wife, my brother, and 2 of my meditation teachers. So 16 people did hour-long anonymous interviews, and then I got a 39-page report, like, filled with blind quotes.
You said that you entered the fetal position for a little while after reading this report. Walk me through that sort of journey of, oh, my God, I had no idea that this is how people perceived me, and then how can I kind of get out of this fetal position and turn this into a positive?
Yeah, so the first 11 pages of the 39-page report were dedicated to my, positive qualities, and that was nice. And then it was 26 pages of just unremitting beatdown, and people identified issues like emotional guardedness and impatience, dismissive-ness, and sometimes having an overly cutting sense of humor, which you've experienced firsthand off the air. And I felt completely fraudulent, that here I am, this happiness proponent, and clearly still had these serious deficiencies, and that the aspects of my personality that I thought I was hiding were really on full display for other people, and it was totally humiliating, and I felt, angry too at some of the comments, and my first instinct was to go fetal and to almost like hang it up. And then I had a few days to kind of let my nervous system unwind, and I realized actually this is an opportunity. And I started doing all sorts of things, like I did therapy, executive coaching, communications coaching, which was really helpful. And then I ultimately went on like a 9-day silent meditation retreat, which we can talk about if you want. But what I think the nugget of wisdom that really turned things around for me was becoming okay with my shortcomings, with my demons. Instead of trying to slay my dragons, which is the attitude a lot of us have in the West about anything that's wrong with us, we try to eradicate it and uproot it. Actually having a warmer relationship with it allows it to calm down. And so you can think about that as a kind of self-love.
You and I used to work side by side together on Weekend GMA. Yes. You've been a friend to me. You have been a mentor to me. You have been a prankster to me. You have been annoying to me. You have busted my chops over and over again. But underlying all of that, I've always pegged you as someone very confident. So how surprising was it for you to realize that a lack of self-love was at the root of this? And what's your advice to people who are now starting to think, oh, maybe I need that too?
Because I was in the meditation world for so long, I had heard about self-love, or the scientific term that's often used as self-compassion. And I was theoretically on board with it, but it always struck me as pretty cheesy. And I just didn't want to do it. I mean, the kind of meditation that I went and practiced intensively is called loving kindness meditation. And as I say in the TED Talk, it sounded like Valentine's Day with a gun to my head. And so I like all of these practices that are designed to make you warmer to yourself and others, which, by the way, are backed up by a ton of science. All of these practices are really helpful, but I didn't want to do them. And it was only just doing them that really turned things around for me.
So I'm out of time, but quick tips for people who want to follow in these footsteps?
Yes, loving kindness meditation. Search it on the 10% Happier app or on YouTube. Do that, and the science shows it'll change your brain, the rest of your body, your psychology, and your behavior.
All right, Dan Harris. Dan's TED Talk is out now. How to not be a jerk to yourself, something along
like
those lines?
Yeah, something like that.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Diane Macedo. Do stay with us as ABC News Live continues with news, context, and analysis. I hope you are not being a jerk to yourself today.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.